For the month of March, I wanted to create a website and I wanted to learn some new technology while creating this website. I wanted it to be simple such that it would be finished quickly, but I wanted it to be meaningful in the sense that it was not completely useless. Last year at React India, I met Shruti Kapoor. Shruti Kapoor is an awesome developer who has a side hobby of collecting developer life related jokes. So she has a repository called Dev Jokes, which is a crowdsourced collection of programming related humor. I noticed two main things. One, it was really hard to consume all the jokes because it was a huge readme and you would have to scroll through this whole readme to read all of the content in there. Second, I noticed that it is somewhat hard to contribute jokes, right? First of all, you should raise a PR, and even after raising a PR as admins, when you are reviewing them and merging them, there's a high chance of merge conflicts because the whole thing happens in one markdown file. Shruti's main idea was to create a website for this repository of content. Welcome to my channel Kodmad TV. My name is Pavithra Kodmad and you are watching how to build a website in 2020. So the website that I'm talking about in this video is the one that I built for the DevJokes repository. My first requirement for the website was that I wanted it to have a home page where it displayed one joke at a time. This I thought could be a random joke, and I thought there could be a next button prominent on that page which would change the joke that was displayed on the page. I thought as a home page this would be simple, it would tell you what the content was all about and you could consume it one after the other. For this to happen, I wanted to create a database of the jokes. I wanted to transfer all of them from this markdown file onto a database with some metadata around them. I wanted to create a form where we could accept submissions of new jokes, and I wanted this form to be available only when you log in into the website, and I wanted to use GitHub OAuth for it. Since we are primarily looking for developer related humor, and it would be reasonable to assume that they will have a GitHub login. And secondly, I would have liked to have an approval workflow for these jokes for new submissions. So when there's a new submission, I wanted a UI where the admin team could have a look at it and see if it matches our code of conduct and approve it or not. And I could show to this logged in person whether their submitted joke was approved or not, and things like that. But these are nice to have, and I did not end up implementing them. So in terms of tech choices, this is where I tend to get a little ambitious, my major goal with most of these side projects will be to dabble in new tech and learn what's happening in these communities. The ideal tech for me that I'm familiar with for such a project would have been to use Gatsby with probably a GraphQL database and deploy all of it on Netlify or Heroku. For this website, however, I decided that I would not use any of these. Particularly, I wouldn't use React, and I would try out something else that is out there. All things considered, this is what I managed to build in the last few weeks.
1, 2, 3, fuck it.
Okay, so this is a DevJokes website, and that's the kind of logo that I came up with, apart from my design skills. So the home page displays a randomly chosen joke, and you have the next button there. You click on the next button to read the next joke picked from our database of jokes. There is the submit button. So when you click the submit button, it asks you to log in using GitHub. So you can perform the OAuth operations and log in into that. As soon as you log in, it presents you with a form where you can submit new jokes in text or image or both. I haven't yet put any validations in there, but so when you submit, I do store your GitHub username. And anyway, the default approval for all these jokes is false, so you would have to get into a database and approve them to show up in that random homepage. The about page kind of, I tried to put in some information. This could be better. I mean, it could show the links properly. But mainly, where is the repository, where is the data, and how you can contribute to the project itself. This website is hosted using now.sh. Right now, I don't have a domain for this. I'm using the default one. Let's dive into all the tech that I used to build this website and what I learned about each of these tech. When I thought about this website first, one of the first ideas that I had was to build the website using a no-code solution, and specifically I wanted to try out Webflow. So Webflow is this website builder GUI. You can visually build a website and it creates a real one out there. So I'd never used Webflow before, I'd only heard a lot about it. I thought this project could be the one which I could build using Webflow. To use Webflow, I created an account on their website and then created a project. So it showed me this UI. It looked like Photoshop to me. There were so many options on all the sites. I was a little overwhelmed when I first logged into Webflow. But then I thought maybe the UI could be intuitive, and there was this whole video series with the tutorials on each of the features. I started watching a few of them and I got a good feel for how to use the product itself. You have all these options on the left part of the screen, so you can pick components from there, drag and drop them onto the center and start working with them. So as soon as an instance of that component is created on your page, all its properties will be editable using the right part of the screen. So basically the idea of building a website is you drag in a component and you mash them together, you can nest them, you can put them one after the other. You can see how each design looks in different screen sizes and so on. And you can adjust each of these components using the right side toolbar. You can change margins, you can change background colors, fonts, text and whatnot. At first, Webflow seemed like a really good option for me. I was able to make the layout that I wanted. It was easy to link things and all of that. So the next thing that I decided to check out using Webflow was their CMS feature. They have an inbuilt CMS where you can store records and they can have different fields. From this CMS, it is very easy to pull in components onto the page. So to add data to this CMS, you needed a CSV of your record collection. I wrote a small Node.js script to convert all jokes in the markdown file to a JSON kind of format. But pretty soon I realized that the free version of Webflow allows you to only have 50 items in your CMS, which was too less for me and it would not at all scale for my little project. I also had a couple of other concerns while using Webflow. I did not know how I would randomize this data to show in the homepage like I wanted. I knew how to do that with code, but I didn't know how to do that with no code. Also, I was a little skeptical of how the whole GitHub OAuth thing that I wanted would work with this whole setup. There was no specific video towards it, and it seemed hard to do with what was available in front of me. So for these reasons, I decided that maybe Webflow is not the solution for me. Maybe I should still stick to coding. The learning curve for the project with Webflow seemed too high to me, and I thought maybe this was not the right project for it. Maybe next time I'll use Webflow and make a whole video about how to work with Webflow. So the next thing that I tried was nuxtjs. So nuxtjs is a framework that uses Vue. It's Next.js but for Vue. So Next.js is a project that I really like. When it first released, I was very excited to use it and I had a good time using it. It promises you the good of both the worlds of server-side rendering and client-side rendering, and I really liked that. So I expected Nuxt.js would be similar, but it would try to do the same thing using Vue.js, and since Vue.js is a framework that I have not used until now, it got me a little excited. So Vue.js has a really good community behind it. I've heard so much about it. Sarah Drasner always uses it, and I've wanted to try it out. So I thought maybe going with nuxtjs, which kind of does all the boilerplating for me, and I just have to write some business logic. I thought it would be a good platform for me to learn Vue.js. Also in favor of nuxtjs, when I googled nuxtjs and saw its repository, I saw that there were tons of examples around it. There were modules, there were tons of videos. So I thought there's a good community behind nuxtjs also, and it would be easy for me to pick up since I was familiar with Next.js. I ended up using Create Nuxt app actually. So in the React world, you have Create React app and Next.js, which are two totally independent project creating frameworks, right? But here in the Vue world, you have Vue.js, you have Vue CLI in which you can build Vue.js projects, you have Nuxt.js. So to build Nuxt.js, to build up the boilerplate of Nuxt.js, you have something called Create Nuxt app. So I thought that would be a perfect beginning point for me. So I tried Create Nuxt app, created the whole boilerplate, and I was kind of familiar with it because Next.js also has this pages folder and Nuxt.js also had it. So there was a layouts folder and then there was a nuxtconfig.js. So these were all things that I expected to be there. And one of the nicer things of Create Nuxt app I found was that each of the folders that it created had a readme file in them telling you what the folder was for and whether you needed to keep it, when you needed to keep it, or whether it's better to delete it. One of the things that struck me while using Vue.js was that this framework makes heavy use of the this object. So when you use React, you typically are trying to write functions and not use the this object, not bind this a lot of times, or just use arrow functions or now with hooks in there, you never use this dot state also. But Vue.js has a huge emphasis on the this object. This reminded me a lot about how Angular used to work. So what you do is you can have tons of configuration inside nuxtconfig.js, and all of this will appear in your Vue instance in the this object. For example, since you have included the auth module, the $auth object will be injected onto your this. So this $auth will have all of the things that you need to do auth with inside your Vue instances. So in this first phase of things, I did not create any UI or anything. I just created a Nuxt app. I understood how things worked inside it. Then I shifted my attention to deploying it somewhere. So I decided to use now.sh for this project because again I had used Netlify before and I wanted to try out now.sh. So now.sh is a deployment platform provided by the company called Zeit. So you can deploy your front-end applications in now.sh. Next.js, which is also made by Zeit, enjoys good support from now.sh. So I figured since Nuxt was very similar to Next, it would work in the same way, and now would be a perfect place for me to deploy my application. You typically pull in your GitHub repository onto it, and then the UI showed this drop down where you could select which framework you were using, which is pretty cool. Nuxt.js was. It picked up the default build and start commands from my package.json directly. I had to, however, add a now.json onto my project. This now.json uses something called nuxt/now-builder. So I found documentation for this and followed the documentation. I cannot say that I understand completely what's going on with this integration between Now and Nuxt, but it did not give me a lot of problems, so I just went ahead with it. So I added now.json and pushed it into my GitHub repository. I then pulled it in the now.sh UI and set it to make a new deployment. But in my first attempt, I created the Nuxt app inside the existing DevJoke repository. So now was not able to deal with submodules very well, I felt. It asked me to enter the directory in which my project lives. And when I provided it, it showed me this error and I didn't know what to do with it next. So I went ahead and created a new repository which gave me a much smoother workflow. The second problem that I had was, while creating a Nuxt app, it suggests you to choose one from a bunch of design systems. When I did a create Nuxt app, I looked up all these design systems. There were like 10 or something. Beautify, Vuetify, Framework, Material Design and so on. And I decided that Framework would work very well for me. So that's what my Nuxt app was in. But this somehow failed to deploy on the Zeit platform. It was working fine on my local, but it wouldn't deploy at all in the logs here. When I went and checked the logs, I did not understand. Some C files were failing and the CSS and all of that, so this was too much. I saw that it was related to Framework, so I just scrapped the existing Nuxt app, created a new one, did not choose any design system, and that deployed fine onto now.sh. With that out of the way, my next challenge was to make sure that the auth worked well. OAuth is technology that can be confusing to some people. Things are a little hard to debug and hard to understand what's happening. There's abstractions that implement OAuth for you, but when they fail, they are very, very leaky. So this has been my previous experience with OAuth, but I had done my internship project on building an OpenID implementation in C++. So you want to use this third-party website. But the third-party website does not know who you are. So you delegate that authentication and authorization part to a trusted website like Google, Twitter, GitHub, who have verified users, right? So since they do two-factor authentication and they ask for your phone number, this third-party website can be sure that you are a real user. So for this third-party website, to know who its users are, it has to implement an OAuth mechanism, which is a kind of handshake with the standard website like GitHub, Twitter, and so on. So what you do in an OAuth handshake is that, let me take the example of GitHub here. First, as a third-party website, you will register yourself with GitHub saying that you will be authenticating all of your users using GitHub. So GitHub knows that this website exists. So GitHub provides this website with a client ID and a client secret. This secret is only known between GitHub and this third-party website, and that is how it does this authorization securely. So when a user arrives on the third-party website and says they want to log in, the third-party website uses its client ID and sends the user over to GitHub. So the user goes on GitHub and decides if they are okay with all the information that the third-party website can access from GitHub and say authorize. So when they say authorize, the GitHub will send back a state or code to the third-party website, which will expire in very quick. The third-party website combines the state, which proves that the request was made right now, and combines the secret that it has and sends both of them over to GitHub. So GitHub is now happy that the handshake is complete. It knows who the client is and it's told the client who this user is, and it sends over a token. This token can now be stored by the third-party website in a session, maybe in its server, maybe in its local storage, and then discard it when it thinks it is expired. It can be very tricky to implement this OAuth, but nowadays mostly there are libraries that help you with it. So for Nuxt.js, there was this module called the auth module. So in this auth module, you could give it configuration telling it which strategy of OAuth to adopt, and in this case I wanted to adopt GitHub, and if you provide it with your client ID and client secret, then the library will do it for you. The documentation for the auth module was decent, I must say. So it said that at first I have to install this module. The module uses Axios to make API calls, and so I had to install Axios as well. And then I had to specify the strategy and the client ID and client secret in my nuxt.config.js. So I followed the documentation. There was also one step where I had to create a dummy index.js in the store folder, which I also did. The build failed when I didn't do that. So after this, in the last part of the documentation, it said that I can use this $auth and say login with GitHub anywhere in my application logic. So me being new to Nuxt and Vue and all of it, I did not know what they meant by this line. And so I went trawling around the internet for Nuxt OAuth with GitHub examples. So unfortunately there were not many. So then I decided to see general examples of how the Nuxt auth module is used. I saw that the typical pattern of these examples looked like this. They had an index.js file where the login button would be present. On click of the login button, they would call the auth module, and once the auth module finished its authorization, any page which had the middleware for auth enabled would then become available to this logged in user. So using the auth module, you can also get user information and then display their avatar or name or whatever. So after seeing this pattern, I realized that by application logic, they meant that I had to implement a login button somewhere. So I went ahead and did that. I made a login button, and on the click of the login button, I said this $auth.login with GitHub. And then I went ahead and I pulled user information. I was able to print out the username and I was able to see the avatar. As a last step to this whole process, I also wanted to create a logout mechanism. So I created a logout button. When you click the logout button, I called the auth module's logout function. One caveat of this was it would log out in the background and I have to manually reload the page to make sure the new status is reflected on the page. I then went ahead and deployed this whole setup onto now.sh. So once I was sure that my front-end setup was working, I decided to see what I would use for a database to store all the joke content that we have in the repository. So I'd heard of Firebase a lot among the developer community and I wanted to try out to see how that works. So Firebase was another whole challenge. So Firebase is actually an offering of Google, and it is a suite. It's a suite of products. It's sweet. So it's a suite of products which give you database solutions, various database solutions. After reading a lot of the documentation there, I realized that what I wanted was a cloud storage system, and my option to use was Firestore. So you have to create a project in Firebase. It will assign you all of the products to that project, and you can go ahead and enable the product that you want. I wanted Firestore. So Firestore is a NoSQL database, so you have collections and each collection can have a multiple number of documents within them. So the collection that I wanted, I called it jokes, and I wanted to so I created the first record and it allowed me to create whatever fields that I wanted. I wanted text, image, alt text, and the username to be stored. I also wanted a Boolean field to denote whether this joke was audience approved or not. So I created a Node.js script where I again read the markdown from the dev jokes repository and I converted that into a JSON array. Then I went through each of the JSON array and pushed them to Firestore using their Node.js API. Thumbs up to Firestore. So my next challenge was to try and use the Firestore database, try and access the Firestore database in my nuxtjs. So nuxtjs had conveniently a Nuxt Firebase module. So what I had to do was download that module onto my dependencies and then add a Firebase property onto my nux.config. So in this Firebase property, I could copy paste the config directly from my Firebase account. So all there's a bunch of stuff that it needs: project ID, API, secret, some AppSpot URL and whatnot. So I added all the things that it needed, and then immediately on my next build, this $Firestore was available to me. The write and read API are, I think, not so standard, but then there was documentation, I used it and it worked, so no complaints there. However, Firebase has strict rate limitations. In my first attempt to show the random joke on the homepage, I fetched all the jokes at every interval, and within I think like 30 minutes my rate I was rate limited, so I had to wait another day to get back my Firestore powers, which sucked. So I implemented a small local storage implementation where when I make a Firebase API call, I store all of it in local storage, and I don't make the calls again until I think 2 hours. So I'm planning to also move it to session storage and not be in local storage. I think maybe I'll add it as an enhancement. So once I did that, my rate limit was under control. Maybe if I get a lot of users to the website, I might get rate limited again. Yeah, something to look for. One thing about Firestore that confused me is how to authorize people for Firestore. Is the whole security aspect of it. It's still not very clear to me, and I have added an issue to my GitHub repo. There's a bunch of hoops that you have to step through. Yeah, I only have one level of authorization where the API secret is an actual secret. So I'm hoping that'll be enough. If you know of any videos or articles that explain Firestore authorization and security in a nice way, then its documentation, I'd definitely be interested to see those. Hey, hi Willy. At this point in time, I had a working website with OAuth. I had a working database that I could consume in the website, and I felt pretty confident at this stage. So I started adding some kind of design elements to the website. I decided that I would use a design system. Vue has so many of them and they're so pretty. They are accessible too. So I thought I'd try out this one called Vuetify. Vuetify said that they are lightweight, accessible components, and the collection of components in that seemed to be plenty. And I went and saw some initial documentation, and I saw that mostly there were components that started with V, and you had a lot of options: V container, V card, V text, V text field, text area. They seemed to be the whole lot. So that's what I decided to try. So I was a bit skeptical after my experience with the frame viewer. Except I found Vuetify to have very weird documentation. The navigation on the Vuetify website seemed a bit strange to me. After every article, it does not definitely tell you what the next article that you have to read is. It gives you 3 options. And there is a search bar, but I don't know what to search for. Some pages have examples, some pages do not. So it was a bit of a struggle. With some trial and error, I learned how to make a top bar. I learned how cards worked. I learned how to add icons, how to have a form in there, how to have buttons, good-looking buttons. What are the different styles for them? So Vuetify is actually really good. I put a lot of the header parts and the menu parts in that layout / default.view. Then for each of the pages I styled them similarly. I put a card in the middle, and I put the random joke in the home page. I put the submit form in the submit page. I put the login button in the login page, and all of the about text in the about page. So after this, I was pretty happy with where I was. I only had to add finishing touches after it, which is a good feeling. So the last step before I could release this website was to productionize it. So to productionize the application, I wanted to do one last step. I wanted to make sure that my Firebase and GitHub secrets were provided to the now.js build pipeline using environment variables. This kind of took a really long time for me to figure out. I don't know if it was just me, but I tweeted about it and a couple of people agreed with me. And I did run into a couple of open GitHub issues where there were other people also who faced problems with the environment variables. So how environment variables work in now.sh is like this. You install now CLI onto your dev environment, and using the now CLI you can create secrets. You say now add secrets and you give it a name, and actually submit the secret code that you have from your GitHub or Firebase integration. Now you can use that name that you gave it to the secret and use that in your now.json to expose environment variables. So these will be used when now.sh builds your website. So I did that. I went to the now.json and the examples kind of didn't match. The examples in the whole Zeit world said that I needed to have a build object. But the code that I had copy pasted from Nuxt documentation had this builds kind of array. I did not find any good schema of how now.json should look, so I was very much confused at this point where to add. So in the end I figured that I'll add a new build object onto now.json and add all my environment variables there. So I did just that, and then I used the environment variables in nuxt.config in the places where I had to integrate them with the Nuxt. This kind of did not work properly for a very long time. It worked for Firebase, but it did not work for my GitHub OAuth, and the OAuth kept failing. And when OAuth fails, you literally have like nowhere to go. You have no place that you can go see what's happening. You just have this request that's throwing a 500 and throwing this generic Nuxt server error. I'll not lie, I was worried for some time that I might just give up on this whole thing and publish all my secrets. In the end, I figured out that now.json can supply environment variables to the build time and the runtime of your application within now.sh. So if you put them inside the build object, they'll be available at build time, which is when my Firebase integration needs it. But GitHub needs it during runtime, and this setup was not providing it the environment variables at the correct time somehow. So I added the same set of environment variables outside of the build object, and this somehow seemed to solve all my problems. Right now it's working. But the side effect of this whole thing, whole secrets and all of this, is that my dev environment variable setup is pretty pathetic. I kind of have this manual config object lying around that I copy paste whenever I want to run it in my local. One of these days I'll have to learn how .env works, how I should use it. I've written it up as an issue in the repository, and I think that's something that'll be required if I want somebody to contribute to my repo. So currently the dev workflow sucks. But I think I can live with it. I'm very happy with how it turned out. Now you can look at all the funny jokes. I hope in the coming weeks I'll be able to add the paginated grid kind of page where you can see all of these jokes. You can submit new jokes on the website. I will go have a look in the database and see if it's worth adding to the repo and approve it or not. To get a chance, have a look at the repository. So it's called a Dev Jokes website. I will link it in the description below. Most of the tech that I used in this project are stuff that I'm unfamiliar with, and I haven't really built a website in a long time, being a web developer. I'm considering this release to be an alpha release, and for the beta release I have a milestone set up in my Git. So in the repository, and I have issues under it, which I hope to get to. If any of you could help me, that would be awesome too. Let me know what I could do to improve it. Is there some cool module that would make my life easier? Is there some cool feature I could add to this which could make consumption of the jokes content easier? Or if you have a cool design in mind, that would be awesome actually. Yeah, overall I'm pretty happy with the project. I think it accomplished both the things that I was going for. I wanted to learn new technology. I'm now somewhat familiar with Vue, and I understand stuff when I watch talks of Vue.js conferences. Secondly, I shipped something and I was able to make this video. So that's a win for my YouTube channel. With the quarantine happening and me catching a common cold, I was not really productive in the past few weeks. So yeah, I'm kind of really happy to have finished some project and finally released this video. So that I can kind of unblock myself, get into my groove, and make more videos. Hopefully, in this coming year. Thanks for watching till the end. I hope you learned something. I'll see you in the next one.